And welcome back. So let's pick up where we left off and talk about what it's like to work on election day as a poll watcher. In one moment while I share my screen. Okay, so we're going to assume that today is the election day, November 5th, in Fairfax County. So as poll watchers, we want you there 1 hour before the polls open on Tuesday, the 5th of November. The polls are going to open at 6 o'clock. The election officers and the chiefs will all be there at 5. So we need you there at 5 o'clock as well. And we'll talk about why that's important. But the important thing is you're going to observe the preparation for the opening of the poll sites. Now, the team will have been there likely the day before, Monday afternoon sometime, to set up the tables and chairs. They'll put up the privacy folders in the ballot marking area. They'll put up all the signs, and they will have constructed the drop box. And so all of that will be set up. But on Tuesday morning, they need to set up all the machines. So this is the scanners, this is the poll pads, the tablet on the chief's table. Everything needs to be set up. So what we want you to do is when you go in the door, and as I say, you'll see them all setting things up. When they get to the scanners, you need to record the public and the protected numbers, and I'll show you where those are in a moment. The red seal number, we talked about that in the last episode. The zip tie seal number. So zip ties are yay long, and they have a flat space on them on one end that has the seal number. So we want you to gather that number as well onto your report form. The poll pads should all show that 0 voters have checked in, which makes sense, but we want to be sure that there aren't stray voters, something didn't happen. So if you see a number there, you need to bring that to the attention of the chief right away. Same with the scanner, it should show 0 numbers. And then validate that the drop box is there, it's empty, there's nothing that's been put into it. And then the polls should open at 6 o'clock. And if they don't, maybe 6:01, but if there's a significant delay there, please report that as an incident on your report and call the hotline. Now, I will say that our scheduling is such that in any of the shifts, we are only shifting one poll watcher per shift. And part of this is due to room size, and part of it is due to just the requirements from the Office of Elections. So they're only allowing one poll watcher per party for each shift. So don't try to sign up with your spouse or with a friend. There's only space for one in the precinct at any one time. So this blue part of the screen is an enhancement of the little screen that's on the top of the DS200. And you will see it's very clear to read the public count and the protective count. Now, the public count is the amount or the number of ballots that have been pushed through the machine on any one election. The protective count, or sometimes called the protected count, both are the same thing. The protected count is how many ballots have ever been pushed through the machine. So you might think of this as the odometer on your car, and this is the trip meter on your car. This is how many ballots have been recorded. The public count is how many ballots have been recorded for this election. The protective count is at whatever it is, and it'll increment throughout the day. But the public count, and this is what you want to look for, the public count must read 0 before the polls open. If it says any other number, even if it's only 1, any other number, you need to bring this to the attention of the chief. They need to take that machine out of service. Usually they'll just turn it around. There are 2 DS200s in each precinct, so they'll just use the other one. But it needs to be reported, and it needs to not be used at all that day. Now, you're going to get in advance the information about the DS200. This will come to you in an email, probably the day before the election. So on Monday the 4th, and you'll see the information about the protected count, the serial number of the machine, the seal numbers. We talked about the red seal numbers here, and what you should see at the opening shift. And it'll have the protected count as well. So how many ballots have been put through the machine to date, and you should see a public count reading 0. This example was taken at 5:45 p.m., so that's why there are quite a number of ballots that have been pushed through for that day. So if you miss getting all of your data down, you can look at the machine certification form. You can certainly ask the chief. Don't ask at a busy moment. You're going to be there for 3 or 4 hours. So at a more quiet time, you can ask to see the machine certification form. And again, this is going to give you all this information, the zip tie to the cage, these things, the purple pouch and the trip lock bag, we'll talk about later. Those are used at closing. But this will give you the serial numbers of all of the poll pads. It'll give you the serial number and the zip tie number of the DS201. They're called 1 and 2. It'll give you the protected count, the public count, the seal numbers, the ballot. There's a zip tie on the ballot compartment down below in the chamber of the DS200. So you'll get all this information that'll be easy for you to copy over onto your report form. And again, you get this from the chief or the assistant chief. As I say, you're going to get these numbers from the logic and accuracy team, and this will be emailed to you automatically on the day before the election. So if you're an opening EO, you'll have this information in your email, and you can compare that email data with the machine certification form with the machine itself and make sure that everything it matches. And again, you can record the red seal of each of the DS200s on their report form and compare them to the machine certification form. Bring any discrepancies to the chief right away. So once the polls are open, these are things that you may see going on. There are a number of different forms that may be referred to the chief, and these would be considered non-routine situations. So if a voter comes in and he doesn't have an ID, almost 99% of the people walk in the precinct, they have their driver's licenses already out, and the election officer is going to, greet them and say, "May I please have your name and address? Please speak your name and address, and may I see your ID, please?" Most people provide an ID. If they don't have an ID or they refuse to give them one, then they say, then you need to sign a confirmation statement. This is the form that's used if the voter doesn't present a valid ID. This is a situation that is referred to, the voter is referred to the chief or assistant chief by the check-in officer. And the chief will ask the person to sign sign the confirmation statement. They sometimes call this the Popeye statement because it really just says, "I am who I say I am. I am who I am." So they have to sign this, and this just validates that I'm Barbara Tangs. I am who I said I am. If the voter shows up on the polls as a marking that he's inactive, this means that he hasn't voted in a while and he's been changed to a status of inactive. Then he needs to sign an affirmation of eligibility. And this is another situation where the voter needs to be directed to the chief, and the chief will get give him an eligibility statement, and then he will be activated on the poll pad. There's a secondary use for this form, and if there's a challenge, so any voter can challenge any other voter's authority to vote. So if someone suspects that a person shouldn't be voting, is in the wrong place, maybe that the person isn't a citizen, the difficulty with the last situation, and especially in light of the incidents now with all of the illegals coming across the border, is that if you challenge a voter, then if the voter signs this form and says, yes, I am a legal citizen, albeit it's a lie, there's nothing that the election officer can do other than give him a ballot and let him vote. It'll be recorded. And in fact, if you challenge someone without ironclad knowledge that the person isn't who you think it is, or shouldn't be in that precinct, or isn't a citizen, any kind of challenge, if the person denies it and signs the form, then this eligibility form, then he's allowed to vote according to law. If a voter comes in, generally this is the elderly, but it could be anybody with a broken hand or broken arm, whatever, any kind of injury. The voter may bring in a friend, a family member, and ask if that family member could be the person who actually does the marking on his ballot. If that's the case, and the election officer can be the assistant, the only person that can't be an assistant is you as the poll watcher. But if they brings an assistant, or an election officer serves as his assistant to mark the ballot for him, then there's a form for that called the voter assistance form, and both the voter and the assistant need to sign that form. Now, the only instance where you as a poll watcher could assist if someone comes in and their native language is Swahili and they don't understand the ballot, but they're eligible to vote, they're on the poll pad, and you happen to speak Swahili, well, then you can serve as the translator. But that's the only instance. The other person who cannot sign the voter assistance form is if the assistant is the person's employer or union rep. For obvious bias reasons, that person can't serve. It's likely that nobody's going to know that that person is other than a friend, that just came to be helpful that day. And if the assistant is a child, if the child is 15 or younger, then he doesn't need to sign the form. The last kind of form that you might see is called a statement of voter, or it's also affectionately referred to as the goldenrod form. This is because of its golden, yellow, orange kind of color. This is an instance, and this only happens during early voting, not on election day, but during early voting. If the voter comes in, he had requested and shows up on the poll pad as having requested an absentee ballot, and he walks in the precinct and he wants to vote, but he didn't come in with the absentee ballot with him. If he says, well, I never received it, or I've lost it, then the election officer can have the chief handle the situation, but he'll be given this goldenrod form or statement of voter. And once he signs that, he'll be given a ballot and he'll vote normally. This process cannot be used on election day. If the voter comes in, he's showing up on the poll pad as having been issued an absentee ballot, and he comes in and he does not or cannot surrender his absentee ballot, then his only option for voting is to vote a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot is the same ballot as a regular ballot that anybody else is being issued, but that voter is not checked in on the poll pad, and that voter is given a provisional ballot, which means it doesn't go through the scanner. It's put in an envelope, and then that situation is adjudicated by the 3-member electoral board. Those adjudications happen on Wednesday, the day after the election, and we as poll watchers are privy to be in that situation and watching that happen. So if the voter can't bring in his absentee ballot, then he has to vote a provisional, and we'll talk more about provisionals later on. Likely, you're not going to be able to see the ID that people present. Pretty much any ID with a the voter's picture on it. Typically, it's the driver's license. Some people bring in a CAT card or the military ID card, anything like that. Any government issued thing with a picture on it is a valid ID. The voter can bring in his voter ID card, which does not have a picture, but it has his name and address. There are a number of other IDs that are acceptable that have the voter's name and address on them, like a bank statement, a utility bill, and they don't even have to bring those in. A lot of people get their bank statements and their utility bills as emails. So if the voter comes in, he can show the email on his smartphone, and that will suffice. And if the poll pad, if the voter's name is on the poll pad, then he'll be issued a ballot and he'll vote normally. You may see instances where and hear conversation about a voter presents what's called a driver privilege card. Please note these are not acceptable IDs for voting, even though they look like a valid ID. And they aren't identical. In fact, they say driver's license across the top. But there is a federal limit that's on the top of the face of the card. Down here, there's a restriction that's highlighted, and in the back, there's more information about the restrictions. So if an EO sees one of these cards, he's to look at the card front and back to see if there are any of these restriction notations to make sure that it's a driver privilege card and not an actual Virginia issued driver's license. The reason that this is a not acceptable ID is because driver privilege cards are only issued to non-citizens. So for obvious reasons, they're not acceptable IDs for voting, for checking in to vote. So when a voter does present himself, the election officer must ask him for his ID, his name, ID, and his address. And the reason for that is they want to be sure that the voter is in the correct precinct on election day. Why is this important? I explained in an earlier episode of the training that each voter has to be in the right place to get the ballot style that's appropriate for his precinct. This year, we're going to be voting on the congressional members, and so we need to make sure that everybody is in the right precinct to get the right kind of ballot style for his location of where he lives. So those voters that are in Congressional District 11, for example, Republicans will be voting for Mike Van Meter. Democrats will be voting for Jerry Connolly. If you show up in the wrong precinct, in a precinct that's in Congressional District 8 or 10, you're going to see a different name on the ballot, not one of those two. If the voter doesn't have to present any ID. He can sign an ID confirmation. I am who I say I am, and he gets to vote normally. If he refuses to sign that, then he has to vote a provisional ballot. And if the voter comes in and he doesn't present a driver's license, which is the easiest ID for the election officer to use to check in the voter, because there's a barcode on the back of it. You can see here, they all have barcodes on the back. The poll pad machine is designed to read that barcode, and it will automatically screen up the voter that's on there. If he presents a passport, for example, or a DOD ID or a CAT card of something of that nature, the poll pad operator, the EO, will just have to manually enter the name, and he cannot ask the person to present a different ID. You can't ask, this is difficult, I'll have to manually enter it. Do you have a driver's license? He's not allowed to ask that. So we have other materials that you can look at that show all the voter IDs, but since you likely aren't going to be able to see them because you'll be positioned too far away to be able to get to that level of granularity and clarity, We're just showing you the main one that we're concerned about that's not a valid one, but most others are acceptable. One comment here, voters do not need to speak English. So please understand that English competency is not an indicator of citizenship. It may have been in the past, but it's no longer. Some voters have lived here for decades. They live in their own little enclaves of communities, and they function very well in speaking their native languages. Their English is poor, and so they live inside their own communities. But don't think that English is a requirement for citizenship, and it's not an indicator of the right to vote. So you've opened the polls. Now we're there. Things are kind of humming along. What do you do now that the polls are open and things are moving along? So during a voter lull from time to time during your shift, you may want to walk over and look at the numbers on the DS200 scanner and just see if the number of voters in the public count, if those match the same number of voters that are checked in on the poll pads. You are allowed to ask the chief or if what's the total number of checked-in ballots for checked-in voters for today, and they can look on their admin tablet to get that information. They also have a poll pad at the chief's table as well. You want to observe that the chief and the assistant chief are handling non-routine situations according to the law, and they're not showing any partisan bias. So for example, if you want to be sure that all the voters who need assistance, that they're signing the voter assistance forms. If a voter doesn't have or refuses to show an ID, then you want to be sure that he's signing the voter ID confirmation statement and so forth. You're just looking for process to see where are there potential areas for fraud. Now I understand perfectly well, and we need to get the voters, the composition of the General Assembly changed. The Republicans every year, the Republicans put forward bills to change and tighten up our voting laws. Right now, the Dems have both control of both the House and the Senate. So the next time they're up for election, we need to get the composition changed so that Republicans will have the power to change the voting laws. Right now, they're very open. Signing an ID confirmation statement without having ever shown any kind of documentation is very open and leaves us very, very exposed and rife for fraud. So we need to get these election laws changed. But we want you watching for the correct and the legal process as it currently stands. Make sure that that's what's occurring, and as you're making your observations. If someone comes up and calls in and wants to have a curbside ballot taken to them, you can accompany the election officers outside. Obviously, you don't want to have privy to how the person voted, but you're allowed to go out and watch the curbside process. It should be the same as the inside process, just that it's occurring outside. You're not allowed to, again, to talk to voters, so you can't be giving them guidance or advice on how to vote. You're just there watching the process. The last thing we want to note, and we'll talk about this more again with provisional ballots, but same-day registrations are allowed. Voters are given a provisional ballot, and you should be watching to make sure that they don't try to put their ballot into the DS200 scanner. The ballot needs to be in the provisional envelope. It's alone. You may see a fleeing voter. So what's a fleeing voter? Sometimes a voter will just dash out of the voting precinct for some unknown reason, whether it's a personal emergency, maybe you got a phone call, and he'll leave his ballot in the ballot marking area. In this case, the EO that's been monitoring the marking area should remove that ballot once he sees that the voter is gone. He should remove that ballot, write void across the front and give it to the chief to put in one of his election day envelopes. He's going to put that voided ballot in the spoiled ballots envelope. That's the number 4 envelope. I don't know that that's so important to know the correct number for you, but just know that that ballot will be void. And you're obviously then going to have a mismatch in the number of ballots on that are on the scanner in the public count and the number of voters checked in. So this will be a rationale that'll be explained on the chief's paperwork at the end of the day. If the ballot is left on the scanner, the voter goes to put the scanner in under the platen, and maybe the scanner doesn't take it, or the voter thinks that it's gone in and he walks on and he leaves, this is not considered a fleeing voter instance, and the election officer or the chief can go ahead and push it through. It may be a situation where the voter overvoted, that is, voted for too many candidates in a race. Maybe there's stray marks on the ballot, or maybe he didn't mark the little circle completely enough so that the machine isn't reading it right. But in either case, this is not a fleeing voter, and the election officer or the chief can go ahead and push the ballot through. So I mentioned before about curbside voting. Poll watchers are permitted by law to go with the election officer when a voter requests curbside voting. This is generally intended to be for anyone who's disabled or people who are 65 or older. I think they pretty much don't challenge anyone who drives up and requests to be able to vote curbside. During COVID, this was very popular. In some precincts, it's more popular than others. But the point is that is curbside voting is allowed. The voter can vote from inside his car. And you just need to, you can accompany the EOs when they take their poll pads outside and check the voters in. Sometimes this means that the curbside voter is a van load of people. Typically, it's from an elderly community, a nursing home, or a retirement center. They come with a minivan type of thing. It's still, the process is all still the same, and each voter must be handled individually for his situation. So you just need to watch and observe that each voter presents an ID, each voter is given a ballot, and if any voter needs to sign any form, whether it's an ID confirmation form or a voter assistance form, anything like that, you just need to ensure that each voter is handled individually and processed the same as if it were inside. Once the voters have voted, and usually their votes will be put inside a manila privacy folder, then the EO goes back inside, scans all of the ballots, and comes back and confirms to all of the voters, whether it's a car full or a single driver or a van full, and he'll give the voters their I voted stickers. You just need to watch the process and ensure that all of the ballots went through. Sometimes when a voter goes to mark his ballot, he'll mark too many votes, or he'll change his mind. I don't want to vote for Harry, I want to vote for Sam, something like that. And he goes and asks the election officer or the chief, may I please have a new ballot? I've spoiled mine, or I've made a mistake on mine. Typically, the chief will ask the voter to please bubble in all of the circles so that there's no idea communicated as to who the voter was intending to vote for. But once that's done, and this isn't a mandate, it's just a best practice, but once that's done, the chief will give the voter a new ballot, and then he'll write spoiled all across the face of the ballot, and he'll keep that spoiled ballot and put it in his spoiled ballot envelope that's on his desk. Against that, again, that's the number 4 ballot, number 4 envelope. If a person comes in to vote and he's has received an absentee ballot, but now he's decided, I don't want to vote absentee. I don't want to put my ballot in a drop box. I want to vote and put my ballot through the scanner. He can do that. When he checks in, the election officer will see that on the poll pad that he's already been issued an absentee ballot, and he will ask him, do you have your absentee ballot with you? On election day, the voter must exchange his absentee ballot for a regular ballot. And then the election officer or the chief will mark absentee surrendered across the face of that. So that live ballot can't be used by anyone else. And that too goes in his envelope collection on the chief's desk. If the voter is marked as having, absentee surrendered, or excuse me, if he's been marked on the poll pad as having been issued an absentee ballot, and he comes in on election day and he hasn't brought the ballot with him, he'll be told, please go home and get it. Or if not, the only way to vote is he must vote a provisional ballot. And again, a provisional ballot is one that's not put through the scanner. It is given, the situation is given before the electoral board, and they then adjudicate the day after election as to whether or not that vote will count. So when we come back, we'll talk some more about these handling of non-routine situations.